Let's dive into one of the most intense and, honestly, most human dramas ever recorded, the story of King Saul and David. This isn't just some dusty old tale. Nope. This is a masterclass in leadership, jealousy, and what happens when insecurity takes the wheel.
I mean, it all really comes down to this one question, right? How does a king who is literally chosen by God and loved by his people get so twisted up that he dedicates his life to killing the one person who saved the nation? That's the puzzle we're going to piece together.
And at the center of it all, you've got these two guys who could not be more different. You've got King Saul, Israel's first king, yeah, but also a man just eaten up by anxiety and fear of what people think. And then you have David, a shepherd boy, humble, full of faith, and, crucially, a guy God really loved. This clash of characters is what sets the whole thing on fire.
Okay, so here's our game plan. First, we'll see how two chosen leaders wound up on a collision course. Then we'll dissect what was really going on inside Saul's head. After that, we'll look at David's totally different way of handling the pressure. And finally, we'll wrap up with the choice this story puts in front of all of us.
So let's set the stage. The thing you have to get right from the start is that both of these men were anointed by God to be king. This wasn't just politics as usual. This was a divine handover of power, and that's exactly why it got so messy.
The whole thing escalates pretty fast. First, Saul gets anointed. Big moment for Israel, their first king. But it doesn't take long for him to disobey a direct order, and God rejects him. Almost immediately, in secret, God anoints his replacement, this young kid, David. And then, boom, David takes down Goliath, and overnight he becomes a national superstar. You can just imagine Saul seeing the writing on the wall.
Now we get to the heart of it. Saul's paranoia wasn't just random. It was fueled by feelings that are actually super relatable today. Deep insecurity, crippling jealousy, and that terrifying fear of becoming irrelevant.
This is the moment. This is the spark that lit the whole inferno. After a big victory, the women are singing and dancing, and this is their song. To them, it's just a celebration. But to Saul, it was a public scoreboard telling him, "Hey, king, you're not number one anymore." For a guy already on shaky ground, that was absolutely crushing.
And the reaction? It was instant. The Bible is so clear about it. Saul gets furious, and from that very day, he starts looking at David with suspicion. That one little song completely flipped a switch in his mind. One minute, David is his champion. The next, he's public enemy number one.
You know, Saul's meltdown wasn't just about one thing. It was a perfect storm of fears. He was terrified of losing the throne, which, let's be fair, was a real possibility. He watched David's popularity just explode. He was being tormented by an evil spirit, and can you imagine? Even his own kids, Jonathan and Michal, took David's side. That had to feel like the ultimate betrayal. But the deepest, darkest fear of them all? He knew. He absolutely knew that God's blessing had left him and was now resting on David.
All right, let's flip the script, because how David handled all this is just as important as why Saul fell apart. He's literally being hunted by the most powerful man in the country, and his response is, well, it's not what you'd expect.
This quote, it tells you everything. David had not one, but two golden opportunities to kill Saul and end the nightmare. His own guys were begging him, "Do it, it's your chance." But he refused. Why? Because he respected the position of the king, the anointing from God, even if he didn't respect the man currently in that position. That is a whole different level of strength.
So how did he pull it off? It wasn't by being weak or passive. It was a series of incredibly difficult, active choices. He chose to trust God's timing instead of grabbing power for himself. He honored the position of authority. He flat out refused to take revenge, trusting that God would sort it out. He took all his fear and pain and turned it into prayer. So many of the Psalms are about this. And through it all, he stayed humble, letting God be the one to lift him up.
And here's the kicker. The ultimate proof that David was on the right track, it comes from Saul himself. After David spares his life for a second time, Saul breaks down and admits it. "You are more righteous than I." I mean, what a moment. Even his own enemy had to confess that David's way was better.
So this brings us to the big takeaway. This story is so much more than ancient history. It's about two different ways to live, two paths you can take when you feel threatened or insecure. And these two paths lead to very, very different places.
Let's just break it down, side by side. When they faced a rival, Saul's path was to eliminate the threat. David's was to respect them. When they heard criticism, Saul reacted with pure envy. David stayed humble. When God felt distant, Saul forced a solution. Even turning to a witch, David chose to wait and pray. And when it came to their position in life, Saul clung to control with a white-knuckled grip, while David learned to surrender to God's plan. Same challenges, totally different paths.
If you boil Saul's entire tragedy down to just one sentence, this is it. He chose protecting himself over surrendering to what God was doing. He just couldn't let go of the power and position he felt he deserved, and in the end, that's what destroyed him.
And on the other hand, let's be super clear. David's strength was not weakness. It was an active, hard, conscious decision, moment by moment, to trust, to show respect where it wasn't deserved, and to say no to revenge. That takes way more guts than throwing a spear.
And so that leaves us with a pretty big question. In your own life, at your job, in your family, in those quiet moments when you feel overlooked or threatened, who are you choosing to be? Are you going to go down the path of Saul, the path of fear and control and trying to protect yourself at all costs? Or will you choose the path of David, the harder path of trust, faith, and surrender? That choice really is up to all of us.